Okay, hey everyone, and welcome back to the Company Road podcast, where we explore what it takes entrepreneurs to change a company from the inside out. And I'm your host, Chris Hudson, and today we're going to be diving into how AI is revolutionizing the way that entrepreneurs can drive change within their organizations. So joining us today is Ben Lay-Ralph, founder of AI for Busy People, and he's the mind behind Meet and Gather co-working space that was set up in Richmond, here in Melbourne. And Ben has spent 15 years helping small teams achieve outsized impact, often within larger organizations. And before his current ventures, he co-founded and scaled a B Corp certified consultancy to about $6 million in revenue, partnering with Australia's most recognizable organizations. And today, Ben's going to share how AI can bridge what he calls a strategy execution gap. I'm going to get into some of that in a moment, but giving smaller teams and people really like us the leverage to accomplish what previously required huge amounts of resources, massive teams. So whether you're leading transformation efforts or you're looking to drive innovation from within in some sort of way, this conversation is going to give you a load of practical insights on harnessing AI as your secret weapon for change. And if you've seen any of Ben's clips, he's on TikTok and all the different channels. He's a prolific content creator and shares some amazing stuff. So tune into what he has to say. And Ben, a very warm welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Great. And now, Ben, you're no stranger to content creation yourself. So you're on all the socials and obviously you're putting out videos and hints and tips and tricks all the time. You work deeply in the area of AI, and it's been a bit of a head turner, obviously, on LinkedIn and across much of the media for a while now. But have we grown bored of it? Has it grown bored of us? I don't know. Are we doing interesting things with it anymore? There are 1,000 people every minute, it seems, making themselves into Mattel action figures right now. But what have been some of the hottest topics in AI at the moment, do you think?
I think you're so right in that it's becoming very normalized very quickly. I think it went from something that was very out there and like peak interesting to something that people are tackling within their companies as like, oh, actually, this is something that I better start doing something about. And I think the Mattel action figures is also interesting in that it is amazing how fast a fad can go from something that's like wildly interesting to like so over. And like we're talking like maybe in an afternoon.
Yeah.
But that's how easy the AI tools are these days, right? Like you can literally just type with no pre-knowledge on anything about machine learning and create a very impressive image of yourself doing something wacky. And that learning curve fall off has been, yeah, it's very interesting to see.
Yeah. So there's stuff popping up like that all the time. There was the one before, it was like the week before or whatever. I can't really remember what it was called, but it was like a certain illustration style that people were using. So you probably know the one. But yeah, it just feels like there's more things being tried out, more things being pushed. And yeah, people are getting comfy, right? So is it getting more interesting, or is it just plateaued into this creative pool of
yeah it's certainly a position where you can either choose to be pessimistic about the future or optimistic about the future, and I'm always quite optimistic about the future. I think what's interesting about this moment, or what like I harness my content around, is this sense that like there are lots of announcements coming out at a very high rate. Like what actually got me starting my channel back just before Christmas was OpenAI did something like the 12 days of Christmas, and they released new features every single day. And I'm like, in a regular instance or in a regular world, just one of those announcements would have been something that they built up to for like 3 or 4 months. And like that's happening at not one company, but at 50 or 100 companies, where someone's finding these new features, whether it's creating images or it's writing code or creating apps, like these little things that it can do. They're being released and announced every day. And it's almost gone from, wow, this is interesting, to like just trying to keep up with the various ways that you can implement it has become almost like a part-time job. So yeah, I think it's exciting, but in a different way.
Because the fragmented nature of that, obviously it's kind of splintering, right? It feels like there are many options now. And everyone knows ChatGPT, and they think they're impressive when they mention ChatGPT. But there are thousands and thousands of things that you could try, right? And it's becoming a harder space to navigate. And some of it's good and some of it's not good, right? So some of it's still picking up speed. So where do you think some of the challenges and some of the ways to navigate that kind of help? Where can it be easily done, and where is it helpful to start, do you think?
I certainly agree that you can get lost in all the possibilities, right? Like you can just literally look at all of the announcements, very hypey, very frothy, and you can just get stuck in, should I try this? Like, should I try ChatGPT, or should I try Claude, or should I do an agent, or literally things that you can just get lost in. And I think particularly in larger organizations where you can't necessarily just download something and start using it right away in like a professional sense. I used to work on like old school technology projects where you would go through and you'd have the ideation and you do the strategy and you go through a full design implementation process, and then you pick technology, and like all of that, even if you're doing it quickly, takes 6 months. And then you get into an agile world and you're like, oh, maybe we can break that down into like a discovery phase and then some sprints. But all of that just feels like it takes too long in this current environment. And so I think the challenges that people are facing is finding these new ways of working that allow you to work and experiment at a faster rate, while also, I guess, balancing the need for safety and security and planning and strategy. Like all of these things have to come together, and they're very different speeds.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see, probably work with a number of organizations at different stages almost. And it feels like the stages of maturity are wild and different. Some teams are running rogue within an isolated unit within an organization because they're able to do so, or a lot of people just using their personal laptops as well, which may be another thing, which kind of goes under the radar. But they're just trying to see what they can output, and then maybe it's just a case of then business casing it or then doing it. But yeah, this notion of kind of guerrilla AI is kind of interesting because you want to think about, okay, well, where is it official? Where is not official? If you're waiting for the official lines, then what are you having to wait for? And what are the signals for it being okay to use? But yeah, is there a way of just getting around that and do some guerrilla stuff and getting the work done, as you say? Because people are just using it on the phone, on the home laptop, whatever it is.
Oh, 100%. I forget where I got this from, but I heard someone recently talking about this idea that like ChatGPT and these like assistants that we use, like that in particular, like there's lots of different ways AI can be used, but that like assistant in particular is being implemented in organizations the same way Excel was.
Right.
And so this idea of a spreadsheet where people would create them for literally anything. And like large organizations, there is so much data that's just jam-packed outside of all of the other systems that they've got. It just like came out into, and then someone's put it in a shit spreadsheet. And like people would often, probably not people listening to this podcast, but people out there in the real world would be very surprised about how much critical infrastructure is actually just being run out of Excel, because it is just so easy to spin up a sheet. It's quite powerful, and people can just like get something that they're being asked to do done. And I think that's the niche that ChatGPT or these AI assistants is filling, is that it's like people are using them whether they're being allowed to or not. More and more of large organizations' ways of working are starting to operate out of these things organically.
Yeah.
And so then the question really becomes, how do you scale that across teams, across the organization, and kind of utilize that in a more formal way?
Yeah. Which you think you always have to do, but you don't always really, because, with the adoption curve as it is, some people might not get around to it or need to. Whereas like a 10% or a 20%, I don't know what the percentage is, but there'll be some forerunners and some people behind that, right? So the people that need to use it will, and the people that won't probably will just be in the Excel version.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think Anthropic, who makes Claude, came out with a new research, like a new paid tier, which is like $200. And what they're finding is that the people who are buying it, developers at large organizations using their personal cash to buy it. Like it's proven that it can help them so much that they're spending their own money on it just because it makes their day easier.
Oh yeah, that happened with Adobe as well. Like people were just buying like the licenses for themselves. And maybe not with Figma, that was a bit more legit, but it felt like there were workarounds. People were just finding ways, not in a software sense, but just work stationary or other like basic things that you would just bring into work because people wanted to have it a certain way. Yeah, it's been something that's been hacked a little bit for a while, I think.
Certainly, I think there's more of that like groundswell usage of it. Like that actually feels relatively mature almost within organizations. It's the how do you then build it into your products to improve the user experience of the business? That's, I feel like people are more nervous around. How can I use it in my own personal workflow is a lot safer than how do I restructure our service offering to take advantage of AI? And I
Yeah,
think,
sure.
say, if the part of the curve is that like AI is here and it can help me personally is maturing, the next wave is how can we improve our internal processes by using it to do admin, project support, writing content. Like there's thousands of use cases, but it's within your internal teams and organization. And
Yeah.
then the last lagging factor would be how do we change the product in a
Yeah.
world that has AI in it?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It presents a fairly open-ended challenge or question, which is around how those individuals that are using it in their own way, in a fairly nuanced way, how does that become scaled and systematized, and how do people actually make sense of it and work together as a team in collaboration with it as well? Because it has been, I'm going to input this email and ask it to do something better, make this email sound more formal, make it sound more funny, and do it in the tone of voice of Tom Hanks or whatever you want to use. But, you can see how it's become very individualistic and quite sort of introvert, not inward facing, I want to say, even though it's an outward expression in the end, because it's creating and outputting something as generative AI. But it feels like that ownership of it sits with the individual and it needs to then stretch into an organization. So that could be interesting to see how it plays out.
Very. Like at the moment, we're still in a, I mean, it depends on the organization, it depends on the people, but I still feel like we're in a moment now where people feel like if they can catch you using AI, they've got something over on you. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
there's an N dash. There's a little dash in the words there. I'm pretty sure that ChatGPT has written that or whatever it is. And I think we all just need to get over that as like a
It's
little gotcha.
that's it.
Yeah.
My wife's a designer. She was talking about typography and was like, the only people that know about in dashes are creative and art directors that worked in the 90s, or people that have come from a serious publishing background, and you wouldn't use it. Nobody else would have a clue as to how to use it. So yeah, it pops up, right? And yeah, other things, the spelling, capitalization, you can soon see what words it's using quite frequently. So
Totally. And there's parts of it where it's like your job is to make the content, like you as a person is your job is to make the content better because ChatGPT can create some generic stuff.
yeah,
But then there's the element of like, if it's just polishing the words or helping you think, the fact that it did that shouldn't be something that you have to have as a secret. It always reminds me that there was a time when Wikipedia was seen as like trash. If someone called you referencing Wikipedia, they're like, oh, you're not a serious person. And in the like the span of 10 to 15 years, I think if someone's citing Wikipedia, they're citing it because they're like, this is fact. And there's so many other news sources. So I think these things change.
yeah, fake news and all that. The fact that I've got a 13-year-old daughter and she's watching YouTube, and that is all the truth, right? That is like the truth. And it's just somebody like you and I on this podcast. We're just talking about what we think, but that's taken to mean something. The associated meaning of an expression, it could be verbal content, written content, anything. But as soon as it's made and it's out there in the world, it's considered to be real. So
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah.
it's a hard thing. That sense of truth, it feels like the fact that it's a pooled, crowdsourced thing is bringing together a lot of sources of information, and obviously the more it's being fed, the more it understands and the more nuanced it becomes. And that sense of crowd knowledge and the sense of the wider shared knowledge pool, it feels like you would in the end get to a definition of the truth that's evolving and evolving and evolving, but that feels like it could become quite credible. What do you think?
Oh, hard agree. I think,
Mm.
yeah, definitely. I think there used to be this concept of like wisdom of the crowds. And I
Yeah.
think it kind of plays on that a bit, right? Which is, it's like, there's probably a few ways to think about it. The first part of it is that they crawled a bunch of random content on the internet. And just by taking that large snapshot, taught these models how to speak English in a well-defined way. And within that, it can speak English thing, there was some fact and there was some truth, but there was also some craziness and there was just wild speculation about putting like glue on pizza or whatnot, right? But then as people use it and provide feedback, people can add much better data sources. They can remove things that don't work. There's a lot of reinforcement learning that people just have using it. And I think that is what notionally makes this thing smarter and smarter over time, is that it wasn't created by one person. It was it's being used by so many people and getting so much feedback on a daily basis that it's impossible for it to, it's not the truth, but it's what we think the truth is as a society right now, which can get a little philosophical, right? Like what is the
What's driving what? I mean, it feels like if you got smart people putting smart things in and giving it feedback, then it would educate. If you've got dumb people putting, I can't call people dumb people, but if you put in like, because I was just running some research about this the other day, and with AI, we were talking a little bit about how the difference between interaction with a conversational AI and a human, and people are just abrupt, to the point, direct, borderline rude with the AI. Some people say you've got to be nice to it. That's another topic of conversation. But yeah, they're
better results.
It's like, can you give me this? I've got these items in my fridge. What am I cooking? It's kind of like you talk to it like you wouldn't talk to anybody else in your life. So it's kind of the blandness of it could lead to a lesser version of the AI, but obviously that could be balanced with the people that are pushing its capability and feeding it with a lot richer content. So that will always be in balance, I'm sure, as a tension. What do you think?
There's a few things that I think in there, and I'm not an expert at model design or how these models are put together by any way. So everything that I say is a grain of salt. But what I find interesting is we're kind of moving as a society, I guess, as all communication has, to just more. Like the amount of photos we have, the amount of interactions we have, like all of that is becoming more and more and more and more. And even like the printing press before that to the printing press and after was just more people being able to share their experience. And I think there's something to the notion of people putting smart things in and trying to protect from the dumb people not putting dumb things in is almost balanced, where it's like, is if you just get lots and lots and lots of stuff from lots and lots of different people, and the lots of different people bit is, I think, the most important part, which is that you just get so many different experiences of the world that don't necessarily usually get picked up in things that were being published or talked about. And so it's this balancing factor of, yeah, there's people who are saying things that are clearly like untrue by any scientific standard, but often those people are talking to an experience that they have, or they think about things in a particular way, or like all of that stuff, as long as the LLMs can be tuned in a way to operate the way we expect, actually we're getting a much better breadth and depth of what's actually happening in the world than we were probably having before, when we were trusting a small amount of people to publish very specifically accurate things.
Yeah. So from a representation point of view, it would be more visibly and accurately represented, for better or for worse. It's basically what TikTok or YouTube is.
It's certainly a for better or for worse situation.
Thinking we want to create, and this is what we think people want to see and read. So that's how it's going to be.
Look, I would base this just on looking at the transition of like going from no websites where all you could reference was books. And I was old enough to just catch the generation where you're like, half of my schooling was done purely going to the library and looking at physical books. Yeah. And then the other half was like, now we've got websites and access. Yeah. And I think AI, if it's just another order of magnitude of there, it's like there's more craft, but there's also a lot more genuine, valuable stuff in that, would be mine. So it's like that's what I would hold to in my framework, not knowing how the numbers and the math work under the hood.
Yeah, the days of the encyclopedia on a CD-ROM.
Yeah, there used to be gold standard.
That's all the knowledge in the world, apparently. It's on one disc, and I'm going to put it in my machine. I'm going to ask it whatever I need, Interesting stuff. So that will be the trend more and more. So for navigating that more and more, it feels like we'd need some discretion, right? We need some judgment around how to handle that, what to take, what's credible, what's not. It's going to be hard, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
recommendations, it's a bit like choosing whether to go with this airline or that, or with this shop or that shop, but it's much harder than that.
Certainly, yeah. Like where it becomes interesting, like when you actually get AI to do stuff for you, right? Like if they're acting as these AI agents, like book a flight or something slightly more complicated than that, like actually seeing where the rubber hits the road there, it shows you where they're dumb in very particular ways. Like I've always thought, was that saying of like, users aren't good at telling you what they want, but they're good at telling you what they don't want once you show it to them. I think there's a notion of that when you're working with an assistant and you're just asking it for ideas or you're talking with it and it's all just language. It's a little bit easy to just be overwhelmed by how realistic it sounds or how human it sounds and be like, oh yeah, that sounds credible. That sounds great. But then when you get it to do an actual task where you can see that there's a right or a wrong, like get it to code something for you or book a flight, and then seeing it struggle, it probably gives you a healthy dose of this isn't magic. This is just a computer that's easier to interact with.
Yeah, it's fallen from grace. You put in this whole thing, and people I know to some extent go quite in depth with their prompts now, right, around what you're asking it to do. So if you've written your masterpiece in your instruction manual and you've given it all the information you think it needs, and you get served a turd or you get something bad that you weren't expecting, then that must be part of the learning experience. People have got to be okay with that.
Yeah, 100%. Learning about to be a prompt engineer, this is something that's changed, I think, dramatically in the last 6 months, which is, I think there used to be this idea that you were going to have people in your organization who were going to be prompt engineers, or like they were going to be the people who use AI, or everyone was going to have to learn this skill. Whereas now I think everyone kind of has this realization where it's like, you're not going to have one person there using the AI. Everyone needs to learn how to ask a question and get an accurate response.
Yeah.
As part of their job. Like that's going to be something we're all going to have to get on.
Yeah, kind of like a waiter in a restaurant, taking the order to take to the kitchen, and the AI is going to give you the food, and then you're going to take it back to the table. It's a gated version, which would have resulted in a different AI in the end as well, presumably, if that had been curated by a certain set number of people. Whereas now it's open for everybody. So
yeah. It's kind of prompted from a question you asked earlier, and this is potentially controversial. You might not think it's controversial at all, but I've had
right in.
Yeah, so we're like both user research people.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've found very interesting with AI is this idea of like gray user insight. If you've got like gray water, it's like water, but I wouldn't necessarily drink it, but like I'd put it on the garden, right? Like it's this water, it's a bit tainted, but it's okay. I've started seeing when I work with organizations, the quality improve, and actually the quality improve by making the customer ever present, but not necessarily having that customer data be tied back to a specific user. So the same with like analytics within an organization, like there would be this whole thing about like, how do we use our analytics within the organization with an LLM if we can't guarantee the accuracy end to end? Whereas what I've seen is that the decisions in an organization are being made irrespective of whether they're getting data or user research at all. And so taking a bunch of research reports that have already been conducted, feeding them into a bot, doing some clever prompting, and then just giving it to an exec and saying, run your thinking through this voice of customer bot, significantly improves the output of their decision making. One, because the AI is good, but two, because really what's happening is every time they go to do something, they're thinking about customer. Like the AI could literally do nothing, but the fact that they're having to engage and frame their decision in a way that you would ask a customer, just that improves it. And so I think my controversial opinion is that AI lies, but so what? Like there are degrees in which I don't necessarily think that matters.
Hang on. So where are the lies? That was the controversial bit. Where are they?
So I think the controversial is like when I hear people in organizations talk about AI, their biggest thing is they're like, oh, but doesn't it hallucinate? Doesn't it make stuff up?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. I mean, I work a lot in research, as we were talking about just before the show. It's the point of view, the dynamics around leadership, and obviously how closely opinions are held, and how that can be liberated. It often is needing to be backed up by user research or customer research. And people are going to some lengths, sometimes you're talking to thousands of people and surveying them to get get the data that supports or disproves somebody's highly important point of view. That can be the case too.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're thinking about that. But yeah, if it's democratized, the AI, if it was asking, if the CEO had this point of view, was asking the AI for the answer, and the AI was not, obviously not really going to care about what the CEO thinks because it's just going to give the answer that thinks it's the right answer, then that will change political dynamics, within team structures and decisioning and all of that, which could be interesting. If
Certainly
you take
good.
decisioning out of the mix from an entrepreneurship point of view, from an organization point of view, because it can be neutralized as something that is, it's crowd learned, and all of the data that's feeding into it is the collective wisdom, as we were saying, then what's that going to free us up to do? What are we going to be doing if we're not talking about what the decision should be?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, sorry. Do you have a follow on?
I could talk about that forever, but
Yeah, okay.
you go.
Yeah, how far away from that do you think? Do you think we're close to that, or are we just learning the baby steps at the moment?
I'm not necessarily convinced that AI is going to take anybody's job, to be frank. The way I see it playing out realistically is that there are a lot of people trying to figure out how to reduce headcount using AI, and I haven't seen a single version of that has worked to meaningfully reduce the amount of people that they have while keeping a level of quality. Like, there are actually plenty of high profile examples where people fired a bunch of their support staff and then started hiring them back. Well, they said they weren't going to hire any more developers, and then you just look at their LinkedIn profile and there is developer jobs in there for days. And so I think what will happen is that anything AI can do becomes commoditized right away. It's like, by definition, if AI can do it, any organization can do it. And so I think what's more likely to happen is that it raises the bar for everything. And so that there are certainly things that you used to spend a lot of time in your day doing, whether you're a researcher or a developer or any of these kind of knowledge work professions. They're like, what you do during the day will change. But I'd be very surprised if what happened was it did all the work and then we all sat there and we were like, I don't know what we're going to do. Mostly because I don't know what your experience is like, but my experience within organizations is that there are a lot of people who have a bunch of stuff that they say they should be doing. Talking to customers is like a great example, but they never actually have the time to do that stuff. And so I don't think you ever get to the end of a list of tasks.
So all they're going to do is talk to customers. Is that what you're thinking? They'll be out. They'll be around their homes having tea every day.
If that's the competitive advantage, then that's what you'd end up doing. Yeah, no, I don't. It's a bit facetious, but no, I don't actually think that that's all that unlikely. Particularly because I think probably what will happen is that AI allows us to, and this is the difference between like a strategy execution gap, right? Which is that you used to want to do things within an organization. You'd have all of these brainstorming sessions, you'd have a lot of strategy, and they would all come down to this one bottleneck, which was delivery. And you just could not do that much. Whereas I think what I'm saying is that delivery is starting to become much less of a bottleneck. And so more ideas can flow through, which requires a lot more strategy, research, customer insight to be able to actually create good stuff, because the can we do it is no longer the bottleneck that forces decision making, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that is an interesting point itself, because I wondered where it would leave our friend strategy in the mix of this conversation, because what we've seen, and I don't know if this is relating to AI or not, but it's certainly in the last 12 months, feels like the senior management in a lot of cases, big corporates, has been trimmed back. So there are a lot of redundancies here and there. There's a real focus on shipping the work and delivery. It's engineering, it's dev. Obviously, work needs, from a product point of view, if you're running a software business or whatever, you just need to get the design done and out there into the world so that you can see whether it works or not. But yeah, friend strategy, where does it sit? Is it just being directed from above? The implementation, the design, that can often be now with AI just driven with a few simple prompts, and people are just getting to a version of something creative, and it ends up being evolved a little bit. But there's either a danger of the strategy being missed or a danger of the executional aspects just being a bit grey water, as you were describing before. You get around some of that and still keep it joined up, do you think?
Yeah, I think strategy is about to have a renaissance, to be honest. I think there are certainly going to be companies
Renaissance is
who...
the right word. It feels like a traditional word to use.
Yeah, and I think, and this is a bit rogue, but I think it will be
Yeah.
traditional strategy. Like, I think it's hard to speak in such broad terms, but what I've experienced is that there are a lot of people who do strategy who that isn't how I would describe what they do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I just don't necessarily think that often those roles are being all that strategic, and it's not their fault. It's just that what they're being asked to do is, we've got all of these requests coming in and we've got one development team. Could you run the strategy of what essentially gets prioritized in through that pipe?
Yeah.
And as the pipe gets bigger, you don't need that job quite so much.
Yeah.
But if you're executing at 3 or 4 or 5 or 10x the amount that you were doing before, if that's not all directed, then you're going to see organizations just splinter at 2, 5, 10, 50 times the rate that they were doing before. Like, I'm always amazed at just how much waste is happening within organizations because there are teams who are executing things unaligned or unrelated to each other.
Yeah.
And without good, solid, traditional strategy that's aligning these teams, you won't be able to hire a bunch of people to sit between those teams to do the gatekeeping anymore. Like, it just won't be something that is physically able to do by a person. And a specific example of this that I found interesting, and it's more of an experiment that I run with people than anything else, but obviously you've got your organizational strategy and you've got your organizational values, and they're defined to various degrees of clarity. And then what you've got is, say you're a manager and you're working across a department, you've got all the things that they're typing into an LLM like ChatGPT, and you've got all the emails that they're sending on a daily basis. And running their emails and their chats through an LLM, essentially saying, can you articulate what the strategy this person has? Like, what are they actually executing against?
Yeah.
It is amazing how, like, polar opposite they can often be.
Yeah.
Like, they're just disconnected. And I think ideally where LLMs can play a really interesting role in strategy is keeping that aligned. So what we're executing, actually what we're saying we're going to do, because we don't have to have a meeting to figure that out. We can use other metrics.
Yeah, it presents an interesting ethical question as well around what it's got and what it is. It just answering the question that you've asked it about the strategy, but it could, by the same token, answer the question like, what is that person actually doing for the company, and how are they spending their time, and all of these taboo type questions that come up. So I think from a leadership point of view, that data access and consent, some of the privacy conversation comes in. It's not just about the outside world and giving your data away to a bot or an AI that is learning from it, because in this case, it could influence either yours or somebody else's career, right?
I think that's right. I think the difficulty is, I think if I was coming at it without ever working in corporate, I would come out pretty hard to say, if you're at work and you're writing an email and someone asks what you do, like if someone comes to you in a notion like, what do you do on a daily basis? And they can't answer that question, then I think that's a problem. And I don't feel like that's necessarily unethical. It feels fundamental 101. I don't think that that is ethically problematic. Yeah. We both have worked in large corporates, and so we both know how that gets manipulated or used, like you screen capturing what people are physically doing or tracking mouse clicks, or like all of that becomes gross. And I think it stems from not fundamentally understanding the value that people are creating. Like, I think it actually comes from a place of not understanding what people do. Like, if you're trying to quantify what someone does by hours spent or emails written or whatever, then you've kind of missed the point.
Oh, yeah. But there's a lot of that going on, the witch hunt, it's always happening. Feels
completely.
There's the point you were making about, oh yeah, that was written by AI, wasn't it? So what did you do with the rest of your day? It's going to be conversation. So I don't know, if you're on the receiving end of that sort of feedback, how should we be preparing for it, do you think?
Probably not the right person to ask
I know
necessarily.
you're an evangelist for AI, so
Yeah, and I would also, I guess, before that, be kind of an evangelist for not measuring output or not measuring someone's value within an organization based on output. And really what you should be
time.
doing is having time. Like it always seemed like crazy metrics to me. And I'm not the right person to ask because I think that's a stupid thing to do. And so I acknowledge that there are management out there that think that that's the best way to get the performance out of their team. And I think in the long term, that would prove to be incorrect.
Yeah.
To the extent that they use AI to do that in the same way that they've used other tech to do that. I think there needs to be good, solid frameworks, rules, laws from a government who understands this stuff to protect people from like blatant misuse of this stuff. Like, I think that that's probably very important.
Yeah. All right. Maybe I'll ask you a more comfortable question.
Yeah.
Which is probably leaning more into the positive sides of AI and not maybe some of the negative at this point, but it's also in regard to that witch hunt aspect. So if you're an entrepreneur within an organization and maybe using some of the guerrilla tactics or maybe not, but how do you positively create good news and groundswell around AI in a way that you've seen has worked within organizations?
I think fundamentally, AI is a real good word to be able to attract some funding for an initiative that you've got going on. Like, I honestly, so many of the clients that I work with, like, we're not really rolling out AI notionally. What you're doing is you're coming in and, like, or what we would do is you come in and you look at a business and you say, well, what are you trying to achieve? What are all the things that you don't want to do or that are taking you away from what you're trying to achieve? And then from that, you say, great, how can we use this new suite of technologies that have come out to enable those business outcomes? And so probably what I would say is you use the term AI to the extent that it is helpful to you, to the extent that it allows the organization to give you some money to experiment or to try something new or to go out from a different approval process. Like it's good at like, particularly these days, like getting some funding for something that's interesting, but that if the project is just about AI, it's probably not going to succeed in the long term. Like it needs to be tied to some kind of customer outcome,
Yeah.
a business outcome or employee efficiency outcome. Like it's got to be a process attached to something real, not something AI.
Yeah. So, because I reckon that when it first came out, there, there were all sorts of projects that were just going up and out because it had AI just stamped on it, right? But what you're saying is that there's more to that now. So the business casing around AI, you'll still get the money, but you're going to have to put in a proper case for it now. So what do you think has changed there?
I think it's maturing and people are becoming smarter about it. I think we've gone through a phase where there's enough case studies now to see where it works and where it doesn't work. I think within larger organizations, things like AI and like Agile is a very good example. I don't know if you're familiar with Agile.
Yeah,
Everyone
like,
is. Yeah. So I think Agile, its success as a fad that is certainly dying off now, I would say, its success came from organizations had this core problem that they were rigid in how they worked. Like they felt like people couldn't move, like they weren't literally agile, like someone needed to come and like throw all their processes out and come in with a bunch of new processes. And where it succeeded was agile was used to like as an excuse to spend some money on internal reorganization to be able to create an environment where people could have all of these other things that I wouldn't necessarily say were agile. Like if you could use an agile project to improve psychological safety, big tick. If you could use agile to come in and get rid of a whole bunch of hierarchical approval, big tick.
Yeah.
If you came in and used agile to just set up a bunch of scrum ceremonies, then that didn't really help anybody. And the reason I say all of that is that I think companies within their technology at the moment have kind of got a bit stale. Like people have their apps or they've got their website or they've got their business set up on a bunch of technology that if someone came through with some budget and said, how could you significantly improve these things? People would have a bunch of answers. Like people, there's plenty of research has been done about how all this stuff could be improved. And so to the extent that you can use AI to focus that will internally, that's where I think organizations are succeeding. Where organizations are like, oh, we're going to spin up our own LLM and we're going to pump it through a whole bunch of data and we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff, which is just AI without being attached to any kind of user outcome or business outcome, then I think those are failing, and each one of them that fails gets talked about and is just another reason that people are becoming much more analytical about how these projects should work.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So Agile is going to be killed by AI. You heard it here first. But
Yeah, that's probably the most unpopular. Like that, if I get any heat from this podcast, it'll probably from talking bad about Agile.
they're going to be coming for you. You know, there are some passionate folk out there that love a bit of Agile. So,
Yeah. Look, I've taught many people Agile as
yeah. Well, yeah. You've changed.
I've changed. I know. I've jumped into the new fad.
It's funny. I mean, the fact that a generative knowledge-based tool, as it was first probably understood in a mass context, has now, from what you're saying, has applications for collaboration to the extent that it could fix for some of that is kind of interesting, because you're not just using Wikipedia, you're trying to make it change the way in which the organization runs. So from a operational point of view, like, what's it going to take to make that bridge possible, do you think?
What I'm pretty excited about is what works well is when small groups of cross-functional, like a small group of people work together on like an end-to-end delivery, right? Like it just feels, and there's probably research that backs this up that I've read and consumed and I'm kind of summarizing badly, but I think that there is this sense that like people work better when they're interacting with a small group of other people and have a direct idea about what they're actually trying to do. And the thing that I'm excited about when it comes to AI is that there is only so much bandwidth that people can actually store within one of those teams. Like traditionally, you couldn't have legal and marketing and customer research and development and all of that in one team. And so you would have to breadth out, and then these projects would get bigger than anyone can understand, and then that's what leads to failure. Whereas I like the idea of small teams within an organization who have access to like 70% of the information they need from legal and 50% of the information that they need from marketing. And so what that ends up looking like is you've got a marketing team and a legal team and a ops team who are there enabling the business, and their job is to, one, make sure that their LLM knowledge base tool works as good as it can, is as helpful as like it is delivering value.
Yeah.
And then their other job is doing like the 20%, what actually is the legal expertise that you're paying this person for.
Yeah.
And having that person have enough time to be actually able to get into the team that actually needed their expertise at that moment.
Yeah, right. It's 2 days a week now, not 5 days a week. They've got to be in the office. I don't know. It kind of some of these conversations, mate. Yeah.
Well, that's the question about value, right? Like if
Yeah.
you can do, like say you're a lawyer with a particular skill set in acquisitions, right?
Yeah.
The company needs to have you on the employee because they're going to do acquisitions.
Yeah.
Do they literally need you 5 days a week when they're not doing that process? No, probably not. And this is where you can be pessimistic or optimistic. Either the optimistic read is we end up doing higher quality work or working 4 days a week. And the pessimistic read is all of those people become subcontractors and have to jump from organization to organization to make that work.
Yeah. I mean, the fractional roles have been quite popular from a gig economy point of view, but also from the point of view of just having shared resources and access to experts as and when you need. So a decentralized model can work for a lot of companies. Just depends on whether that's right. And obviously those that need it in-house, and if you need your legal counsel or if you're in IP or whatever you're doing, you're going to have people at the point of escalation at any point. So I think it just depends a little bit on the business model. But yeah, raise an interesting question. And I think at the rate things are changing, probably sooner than we think, some of these behaviors and changes and trends will probably start to take shape, right, in the next 6 to 12 months. What do you think?
I think so. You go through a whole blockchain technology revolution where everyone tells you the next 6 months blockchain is going to change everything, and you're like, yeah, and like it never comes. And then someone comes through with AI and they're like, AI is going to change everything, and you're like, want to have a bit of hesitancy about, is this actually going to be as transformative as the technologists suggest? But I'm always actually surprised by how slow organizations move. So yeah, I think it's going to change quickly, but I'm often wrong about exactly how fast.
Yeah, that's
things
down to
change.
all the people out there listening to this. How fast do you want to go? how brave you. I think there's a question around risk. Risk often comes up when these sorts of things are thrown about, and they want to mitigate risk, but also manage any kind of issues with continuity, basically, in the service model, in an operational model. You can't just turn it all off and throw something else in overnight, but there'll be ways in which that could be tried out, presumably quite easily. So, yeah, interesting to see.
Certainly. Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest thing that's changed in the last 3 months, 3 to 6 months, is that people have gone from the risk of doing things with AI is too high to the risk of not doing or understanding AI is starting to build up on people.
Oh, yeah.
Like organizations are starting to be like, look, if we miss the boat on this, that risk is starting to outweigh the what happens if it's bad risk.
Yeah. And why is that, do you think? What's behind that being a risk, do you feel?
FOMO, probably. I'd love to give you a much more academic reason, but I think it probably is just like core lizard brain, just being like, I'm seeing more and more people take this thing up. And I think that uptake is genuine, but there's only so much that you can see that in the media and not have it cement itself in there that it's something that you should think about.
Yeah. What are a couple of other questions? So what about the argument around it being detrimental to the experience of learning and more of a pedagogy and this kind of understanding of if it's all out there and written, is it teaching us to not think as much or to think as laterally? It's particularly relevant, obviously, not just within corporate context, but within schools and universities. And is it just spitting out the answers? And what does that mean? What does that mean for us all?
Yeah, I really grapple or I wrestle with this. Look, there's research out there that proves that people who use these think less deeply and by some measures dumber.
Yeah.
So that's hard to refute. I guess on the other hand, it's never been my experience that a technology that allows you to do something more has resulted in me understanding it less. And that often what you see is the more people can get their hands on the thing, the more they go down into the rabbit hole of how does this thing actually work? And I wonder if like what's going to come out of or shake out in the wash of like we look back from 10 years from now, what we say is that it turns out technology wasn't as bad as we thought, but social media was 5 times worse than we thought it was going to be. Like it's hard to unpick necessarily, but there's a lot of when you talk about the research around like what's making us dumber or what's making us more unhappy, a lot of that kind of isolates down to this weird dynamic that we've created for ourselves where we put out only the best stuff.
Yeah.
Don't put out any of the bad stuff and like create these weird microcultures. So yeah, I would worry about that in particular. I think probably the other nuance, and look, I'm just talking, I should ask what you think. But I think the other nuance that I would have or the experience is that I'm dyslexic. And so I feel like I was born at exactly the right time because computers have always done a lot to be able to get me from like being awful at school and learning and not being able to participate really at all to actually being someone who I feel like I'm quite well educated because I was able to bring the technology together. And just even on the smallest things, being able to just smash out some thoughts and have AI put all the commas in the right spot and then send it out has been, yeah. Or turn text into audio has also been amazing. And so, I don't know, there's a whole mess of answer in there. What do you make of it? This is probably an area where you might understand a little better than I.
Well, that puts me on the spot. I think there are obviously two different schools of thought. One is that the process of learning is training your brain and it's giving you that sense of critical thinking. So what should be taught at the schools, what should be taught at the universities, what should professional development in the end look like? They're all big questions that could be taken one way or another. Some would say you should be using pen and paper. Some would say it's okay to use an iPad or an AI. It's all being used almost for the same purpose, but there are different methods. So I think it'll probably just come down to preference, and parents are always going to have a preference around where and how their kids are going to get educated on that basis. But yeah, I just wonder if it puts the brakes on, like, you've got to wonder when you've got kids, whether if they're just consuming created content and that content is so much more readily available and so much more frequently available, how much more can we take of that And is it putting the brakes on them creating for themselves, or is it inspiring them? And it's completely subjective and probably down to the individual as to what impact that would have on you longer term. The person that isn't in any way connected to technology on a nice island somewhere, that they might end up learning in different ways too. So it feels like it's all formative, right? It feels like you would go through your walk of life, understanding and seeking out probably what is interesting to you. And if you want to learn differently, then you can learn differently. If you don't want to do it, then fine. But I think from a more democratic point of view, it feels like, particularly within an organizational context, there should be some sense of choice ultimately as to whether you want to create your work in a certain way or in another. And the comparison of those doesn't need to be made. It's just about whether the work can be done, whether it can be done to a good enough standard, whether it's exciting, whether it's inspiring. So I feel there's a lot to kind of figure out. And obviously you mentioned social media. You can't just separate that from AI or from technology because it's all interrelated now. So I don't feel like we can really avoid it, but we can avoid the metaverse, right?
Let's all just as a society, let's all just agree that that's not something that we have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. So, Ben, I really want to say just thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's been a fascinating discussion. We've talked a bit about your own personal work and the work that you do within your consulting practice around AI, but obviously you're going into organizations and you're helping to set up some of these systems and fixes for what people would need. So I'm sure if people had questions, they'd like to get in touch. Like, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, great question. Look, LinkedIn's probably the best. So LinkedIn, any of the social media platforms are great. Like LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, AI for Busy People, or Ben Lee Ralph. Yeah, the algorithms will help you find me on any of those platforms.
Yeah.
That's probably the easiest way to get in contact with me.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. And yeah, LinkedIn's in trouble, right? What do you think? There's a lot of content been pushed out there that's just no good anymore.
Oh my God. Yeah. Do you know what, actually? I have a very different answer about this.
Yeah, go on.
A month ago, I was on like a big push on like LinkedIn is the literal worst. And like I would complain about it to everyone. I'm in this phase, I'm trying to get myself out there, I'm trying to market, and I'm like, hated LinkedIn. And an old friend just like sat me down. He's been in the corporate world for forever. And he just looked at me. He's like, generally speaking, I don't know much about social media, but generally speaking, networks are as good as like you make them.
Yeah.
And so I actually have had more success recently with the perspective around like, I don't know, the main feed is necessarily full of a bunch of people who are making pictures of themselves all look the same. But surrounding yourself by like good people on LinkedIn or like small groups or whatever, I've actually, I don't know, it's been a real benefit to me personally. So I can't talk too badly of it actually.
Yeah, okay, good. There's some nice campfire moments out there for those that are looking. So if you need it,
you've got to wade through a lot of sludge.
Yeah. Bring it together yourself. Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Ben. Really appreciate you coming to the show. And yeah, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. And yeah, we'll let you get on with your evening.
Thanks so much, Chris. It was great to be on. Really appreciate it.